Good morning, everyone, from AWS reInvent 2023. My name is Robert Saul. I am the Threat Detection and Incident Response Practice Manager. I look after the Customer Incident Response team, joining you to give some insight about some of the things that we find on security incidents. I'm joined by two colleagues here. Matt, you want to introduce yourself?
Good morning, Robert. My name's Matt Gurr. I'm part of the APJ Incident Response team.
Yeah, Richard?
And Richard Billington, also part of the APJ Incident Response team in Brisbane, Australia.
Awesome. So, we talked yesterday about how the customer incident response team works and how we receive and handle incidents. What we wanted to talk a little bit about today is being brilliant in the basics. Now, brilliant in the basics means that there are very small things customers can do in order to protect their accounts and avoid security incidents. Now we see a lot of security incidents reported by customers, and a lot of them are pretty simple things, right? Richard, I mean, what do you see a lot of?
Yes, so service misconfigurations is probably one of the more common ones, where someone just hasn't set it up quite right, and so unfortunately a threat actor is able to go and use that service to do something the customer didn't ever want to happen.
Yeah, can you give just a quick example?
So one of the ones recently is SES, or Simple Email Service, where they've set it up in such a way that the access to that service is unfortunately on their website somehow. So an unauthorized user can find that access credential and use it to send email messages from anywhere. Send spam.
Yeah, spam and stuff. And that's a huge billing action, right?
It can be. Yeah. Because you imagine the quantity of spam emails that get sent if someone's trying to send spam.
Right. And we talk frequently about, the things that customers can do for incident response. And one of them is looking at your bill, right? Making sure
Absolutely.
We see that a lot where customers are actually come upon an incident because of the billing that they see.
It's a fantastic catch-all because there's a lot of detections you can put in place. But at the end of the day, AWS is a company. They bill for the services, and so if your bill changes notably, something has happened. Either you've got a developer testing something new, or maybe something went wrong.
Yeah. How about you, Matt? What do you see? What are those simple things? Brilliant in the basics. That's what we're trying to get after.
I think it's really that principle of least privilege and making sure that the permissions that you provide to the service or to the account isn't as open, from a availability perspective as what it would be maybe for something that you would use on premise. Yeah. I think one of the main things I see around that is really that people configure their service and they only have like one security control. Right. Whereas on premise you might have 2 or 3 maybe security controls. Therefore, if one fails, it's not going to be detrimental. But in the cloud, I've seen, I think, a plethora of people who just have one security control, and that it's different in the cloud in that it's going to reside in your IAM policy, and that's where the principle of least privilege is going to come in. So if you have a star resource or star policy permission set, then whatever service that role or user has access to, it can have it all. So there's kind of no segmentation from a service level perspective.
Yeah, and we see it a lot. Some of the highest quantity of compromise that we see with customers is the credential compromise, and it comes down to the strategy. It comes down to them, thinking through how they're going to use credentials with their services and applications and everything else. Yeah. So what we did today is we've come up with a list of 4, 5, 6 things that we want to give everyone how to avoid this. Very simple configurations. These aren't hard. Well, one of the things that we hear is customers sometimes get to the very complicated steps first, right? They try to go long and do kind of all this stuff. But it's the basics. It's the small things that you can really make a difference. You can really make a difference with the security of your workloads. So, Richard,
I've got a great one. Yes.
Yeah. So give it to me.
The first one is the idea of least privilege, using as little permission as possible to get your job done. Yeah. And now you can go very small, but the smaller you go, the more effort it takes to get there. Yeah. So starting with a bit of a bigger permission and working your way down is important. And I've got a fantastic example that it's a pet one of mine. Yeah. For S3, it's very easy to give access S3 star, so all S3 actions can be taken. But a great way to separate that out is to think about object actions and bucket actions. So for example, your web application might need to read and write objects in S3. Great, so give them get and put and those sort of actions. But it's very unlikely your web application is needing to delete a bucket or stop or change versioning controls.
Right.
And if something got the access keys, then all they can do is delete your files. But if you've got versioning on, it's easy to recover. They can't delete the bucket, they can't stop versioning. So just separating those two, I think, would make a world of difference.
That requires kind of a change of thought, doesn't it? I mean, when we start, moving, when we see customers, in their cloud journey, they have to think about it differently, right? I mean,
they do. You need to understand what you want to get done, and either start large and narrow it down, and that's the important bit. You have to do the narrowing, or else, like highly regulated companies sometimes like to start with nothing and then just add in the ones you need, which also works. It's just a bit more effort to do it that way.
Yeah. All right, so that was number one. So least privilege.
Least privilege.
Least privilege. And least privilege, not just for credentials, not like IAM roles and stuff like that. Least privilege for services too, right?
In general, if you don't need some permission, that's something that could be abused if it's accessed. So don't use it.
All right, Matt. So he stole yours.
Yeah.
Because you actually led with least privilege. Give me one. What's one you want people to know? I'm
going to add on to that because I think it's a great example around the S3 bucket.
Yeah.
And so MFA, and you can have MFA on delete.
Yeah.
So it's an escalation of privilege. It's an escalation that you need to do as an action to be able to then go and delete that bucket. So even if you don't have the all the bells and whistles, so to speak, you can have the MFA on delete, and that'll prevent the bucket from being deleted.
So this is actually one of my big ones that I always stress a lot. We hear from customers frequently, that their transition to MFA, their implementation of MFA gets slowed because they're trying to do it all in the beginning, right? Yeah. They're trying to go for the very complicated, which is great to have, right? But it takes a long time to get there. What would you tell a customer? How do they just start with something? I mean, what's the one small little step to get them on the road to using MFA?
I think at the root level for the account. So if you enable MFA for the root user access, then I think that's such a great access control piece for your whole account at the top level.
Yeah. So we hear from customers that they're waiting for keys or hardware keys, and all this. How do they avoid that? Just I'm going to give the customer some prescriptive guidance, like just do this small thing, like using a phone, just do something, right?
Yeah. And I think the phone authenticator as an app is probably better than, say, SMS or email.
Yeah.
But I think, if you can, a hardware token, but while you're waiting, you can use the app.
Yeah. So here's the key. Just do something towards the end, to the end of MFA. Don't wait. There's no reason to wait. There's a very large plan, engineering requirements that may take place, but just start somewhere. All right, third one. Richard, you're up. What do you want customers to know?
So when you've got access keys, which everyone knows about, access keys that get you into your account, they're long-lived credentials, which means that if someone gets a hold of them somehow, and there's lots of different ways, unfortunately, that could happen if they're not careful with them, that gives someone access. It's permanently there as a credential. So ideally using temporary credentials. So the best way to get temporary credentials for your service, if your web server needs to access S3, like I talked about before, give it a role. So give it an IAM role that has those permissions, and then every time that web server needs to call S3, get into S3, it can get those temporary credentials. It can use the temporary credentials that role provides. And there are no long-term credentials to steal.
Yeah. So this is the second pet peeve is these long-lived credentials. We see it a lot, and it's not intended.
No.
You know, someone's writing an app and they need to do something to connect something to somewhere, and they put in long-lived credentials, and then bad things happen. And the IAM roles, I mean, that's best practices, right?
Yes.
We don't want to be using static keys at all.
No.
There should be no reason to do that.
A lot of the keys that are static, they create them, they use them, and then they change their application and forget about them.
Yeah.
But they're still there. They're long-lived credentials.
Right.
Whereas temporary roles, as soon as you delete the server, the role's no longer attached. No more temporary credentials. It's
Well, and it actually helps with the engineering work too, because when you have those static keys that are there, any of those changes that you're trying to make in the environment, you're really prohibited by that key in what it needs to be there, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So if you are using a static key, think about the effort of having to change it if you need to for some reason.
Yeah.
If you don't have those, if you use roles, there is no key to change.
Right.
Yeah.
Don't use static keys. That's the key. You know, don't use static keys.
Pun intended.
There's roles. There's lots of ways around it. Yeah. All right. So we said least privileged. Then we said MFA. Don't use static keys. Use roles. Number 4. What do you think?
Log and monitor all the things.
That's a big statement to tell a customer on a journey. Yeah, look at everything, know everything, right? How do we simplify that down for customers in their journey? Make it easy for them.
I think look at what matters in the environment. So start with the sensitive information, the things that you really want to know about, and the things that ask yourself some questions beforehand as to what would I want to know about this data before something happened. And look at it from that perspective. And then I think there is a piece in that where you can look at it from a life cycle perspective around how you manage your logs. So there really needs to be some thought that goes into log architecture and how you want to log your data, have integrity of that data, and then the life cycle out of that. And that could be regulatory requirements, that could be sensitivity of data and the classification or the category of that data.
Well, what we hear a lot from customers is they're so far down the road, they don't know where to start, right? And it can be intimidating, right? Yeah. Where do they start? What do you tell a customer that says that to you?
I think number one, depending on the size of the customer, because that's in our region, we tend to see customers that are probably small on the smaller scale, even as a SMB, SME, small medium business, small medium enterprise. So I'd say guard duty, because that's the least kind of intrusive. You don't need to manually go in and enable those logs to be able to get some insight from them. But I think then CloudTrail, if you want to know, like we store 90 days worth of CloudTrail for every customer in every account. And so having that access to that information is so great, because you're going to get all of the control plane or the management events that happen within each service.
Yeah, I liked what you said about data inventory, right? Because it's really interesting with a lot of the incidents that we work with customers. They start working the incident at the incident, and actually, you start working an incident when everything's fine, right? With planning. So from a data inventory perspective, right? So what we need customers to think about is like what's super important. How am I recovering it? Stuff like that. With that said, where do they start? I mean, we got to give them some place to start from.
It's a great question, and it's hard to answer depending on the size of the organization. Right. But I think enabling CloudTrail, we have published some scripts on enabling your logs using ALE.
ALE.
So that's a great mechanism there. I think Security Lake now, the recent announcements that have come out around that and the general availability. So I think it depends, is my answer. I don't know. What do you think?
I think that just ALE, Assisted Log Enabler, is big organizations will have a team to set up. The smaller end of town, Assisted Log Enabler is a great way to double-click, or actually, it's a command line. So you type and hit enter, and it will enable a bunch of key logs for you. There is more that can be done after that, but that's a great place to start and get a bunch of logs you may need. You may not need them, but down the track, if there's an incident, you may need them, and it'll get them enabled.
I just want to just really quickly at least call the attention to the fact of Jeff Sweet walking behind us in that hat. You guys see that too?
Yeah,
I was a little distracted.
Not just a hat. He's wearing a chicken.
The chicken suit.
Everyone needs to come down to reInvent to Reinforce to check this out. All right, so that's a great starting point. I guess what I always like to say to customers is that this is actually not a technical evolution. This is a thought evolution. They need to sit back and they need to think about the data that they're storing and where is it at, and let the technology come after it. But it starts with them and them identifying it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. So Matt made a great point that sitting down and thinking, if something happened, what questions would I want to answer, and what logs do I need to answer those questions?
That's the beginning of an incident response plan, isn't it?
Just doing that one step will make you realize, wow, I need this and this and this, and we don't have them.
Yeah.
Yep.
All right. So we did. We started with least privilege, moved to MFA. Then we talked about roles instead of static keys. We talked a little bit about planning. All right. What do you got? One more. I think we got time for one more.
One more. Oh dear. I'm going to skip one and go backups.
Backups.
Yes. So I want a little story. The idea of a backup is to have something you can recover from if the worst happens, corruption, deletion, whatever. So think about not just having a backup, which is important, you should have backups, but also think about what happens to get my original workload to not be working correctly. If someone, say, got into the account, unauthorized activity, deleted that, can they delete your backups? And make sure there's that separation. Have a backup, have it separate. Permissions, separate area, use some of the Vault Lock style things that we have in AWS to make sure that cannot be deleted along with your original resource.
So this is great because this is actually connected to your earlier point about least privileged and Matt's point about static keys, because we don't want users, there should be no reason any user should be able to delete a backup, right?
At least not straight away. Yeah. You may want to life cycle them out.
Well, life cycling is different, right?
It is.
Because those are that's what you set for your retention policies and everything else. But and I think this comes, all of this stuff is kind of interconnected of building that strategy, right, and making that statement about backups, having them, and who should be able to delete them. Because the worst case scenario is a threat actor is able to gain access, delete backups, and then what we see is they delete the backups first. And then they exfil or data destruction with ransom, right? And that's bad.
That's bad on both points. You've got your data problem, and then you don't have your backups
to recover from. Yeah. Talk about backup testing.
That's also key. So backups, it's very easy. I mean, services like RDS have backups enabled by default.
Yeah.
It's great to have them. It's essential to have them. Not great. It's essential to have them. But the getting that from a backup state into a live database or a live server actually running your application, when was the last time that was tested? Just like doing incident response testing, that's important to make sure you can get your backup and can get it working again.
When you need it.
When you need it. In the time pressure of our business is down, our website is down, can you get it back?
Exactly. The testing the backups is always just so crucial to me, because you never want to be making those decisions in an incident. And that's one of the things that we talked about yesterday is that an incident is not a time to make decisions, right? No. You want all those things pre-planned.
It's like almost like a sports game in my mind. Professional sports people, they practice, coaching, testing, and then you have the game where you want to hit the baseball out of the park.
Right.
With incident response, it's the same thing. You want to do your practicing. You want to get good at restoring a backup. You want to get good at all that. And then when the game happens, you already know how to do it.
All right, Matt, last one. You got 30 seconds. Give it to me.
Oh, okay, 30 seconds. Don't use
No
root.
pressure.
Don't use root. Remove access keys for your root user and just forget about it. Don't use them. Put MFA on the root account. Make sure there's no access keys, and then just forget about it.
Well, hold on. Take just 10 seconds and walk them through how to do that, because some users we've talked to these customers, that they simply don't know how to do that.
Yeah.
So just take a few seconds and walk them through that.
So go in and create a IAM user with an admin privilege that is able to control the services that you need in your account. So there's a couple of mechanisms. There's AWS organization that you can use, and then you can put service control policies around that with an admin key. So that you can get into the account, you can control it, you can create new users, start services.
Don't use root.
Yep.
Don't use root.
Get out of jail free.
Exactly.
It's root user.
All right. Everyone, thanks for the time. Happy to have you here. Robert Saul, the Threat Detection Incident Response Practice Manager here at AWS Reinforce 2023.